That well is now flowing at 2,000 barrels, and it's paying me an income of $5,000 a week. I have 2 others drilling, and I have 16 producing at Antelope, so... Ladies and gentlemen, if I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There was once an oil tycoon whose fortune shaped Los Angeles, and whose secrets destroyed a president. His life inspired the critically acclaimed movie, There Will Be Blood, and his son would die under mysterious circumstances in one of the most lavish mansions ever built. This is the true story of Edward Doheny, a scandal that rocked the nation, and a crime that remains unsolved to this day. Edward Doheny was born in 1856 in the small town of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. He was the son of Irish Catholic immigrants who had fled famine. His father died when he was just a teen. After graduating from high school at 15 as valedictorian, he took off for the American West. For 2 decades, he wandered the West, digging for gold in Arizona, surveying land for the U.S. Geological Survey, painting houses and mining camps, and whatever other work he could find. By the spring of 1891, Doheny was broke and nearly out of options. He arrived in Los Angeles, which was at the time still a dusty city, full of orange groves and dirt roads. He was living in a boarding house in downtown, when one day he noticed a wagon driver hauling something strange. A thick black tar. It was called brea, a type of natural asphalt, and it was being used as fuel by local factories. This strange black tar would change his life. Edward Doheny tracked where the wagon had come from, and with just $400 borrowed from his friend Charles Canfield, Doheny leased a plot of land in what is now known as Echo Park, where he believed the wagon had come in contact with the tar. In 1892, at just over 155 feet, he struck oil. Los Angeles would never be the same, and neither would the life of Doheny. That first well was soon producing 40 barrels a day. It was the first successful oil well in the Los Angeles City oil field, and it would trigger one of the most dramatic oil booms in American history. Oil derricks popped up everywhere, and Doheny and his partner Canfield were selling tons of oil to local factories and railroads. But California was just the beginning. In 1901, Doheny went to Mexico, where he leased a massive tract of land near Tampico. There he opened the Cerro Azul No. 4 well, the most productive oil well in the world at the time. In a single day, it shot oil 600 feet into the air and roared so loud it could be heard from 16 miles away. Over the next 14 years, that well alone produced over 57 million barrels. By the 1920s, Doheny controlled one of the largest oil empires in the world. His company, Pan American Petroleum and Transport, operated across North and South America. His fortune surpassed $100 million, making him, for a time, even wealthier than John D. Rockefeller. But Doheny's personal life was marked by tragedy. His daughter, Eileen, died young, and his first marriage fell apart. In 1893, his son Edward Doheny Jr., known as Ned, was born, and Doheny began raising him and preparing him to inherit the empire. As Ned grew older, Doheny gave him everything: education, influence, and eventually a home that would serve as a monument to their wealth, the Greystone Mansion in Beverly Hills. Built in 1928 for over $4 million, around $73 million today, it was the largest private home in California at the time. Doheny sold it to Ned for just $10, a symbolic gesture from a father to son. The 46,000 square foot English Gothic estate sat on 18.3 manicured acres. It had 55 rooms, including a bowling alley, a 2-lane indoor shooting range, and its own private telephone switching system. Over 400 men worked day and night to finish it. The character Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood, portrayed by Daniel Day-Lewis, was loosely based on Edward Doheny. The film's infamous bowling alley scene was filmed inside the Greystone Mansion's very own basement bowling alley, a dark scene staged inside the real mansion, where the Doheny family's own dark tragedy would soon unfold. Beneath this all, tensions were rising. A secret deal in Washington had quietly been made, and a political scandal was about to bring the entire dynasty to the edge of collapse. In the early 1920s, Doheny's empire seemed untouchable. His oil company was among the most powerful in the world, but this power came with a price, and soon that price would be exposed in what would become the greatest political scandal in American history, before Watergate, the Teapot Dome scandal. It started with a quiet favor between old friends. Albert B. Fall, a former mining lawyer from New Mexico, had once prospected alongside Doheny in the rough mining camps of the Southwest. By 1921, Fall was Secretary of the Interior under President Warren G. Harding. That same year, Fall convinced the Navy to transfer control of valuable oil reserves, including the Elk Hills field in California, to his department. Not long after, Fall arranged secret no-bid leases with two oilmen, Harry Sinclair, who received Teapot Dome in Wyoming, and Edward Doheny, who was granted access to the Naval Petroleum Reserve at Elk Hills, which was some of the richest oil land in the country. In exchange for the lease, Doheny provided Fall with a payment/bribe of $100,000, the equivalent of nearly $2 million today. But Doheny didn't deliver it himself. He sent his son, Ned Doheny, accompanied by his close friend and secretary, Hugh Plunkett. The black leather satchel containing the cash was quietly handed off inside Washington, D.C.'s Warden Park Hotel. For a while, no one noticed, but in 1922, reporters and rival oilmen began to ask questions. Why had these federal oil reserves meant for emergencies been handed over to private companies without public bidding? As suspicion mounted, the Senate launched an investigation. The more they dug, the worse it got. Albert Fall's sudden wealth, including a lavish new ranch in New Mexico, raised eyebrows. But there was no smoking gun until Senator Thomas J. Walsh uncovered the money trail. The $100,000 bribe was exposed, and the scandal exploded. In 1924, a federal grand jury indicted Albert Fall, Harry Sinclair, and Edward Doheny on charges of bribery and conspiracy. Fall would become the first cabinet official to serve prison time, but Doheny would be acquitted on both conspiracy and bribery charges. The courts ruled that he had simply loaned money to a friend. Ned Doheny, who had hand-delivered the money, was also indicted, but he never stood trial. Less than a month before the second case could go to court, he was found dead at Greystone Mansion, alongside Hugh Plunkett. The timing was impossible to ignore. The son of one of America's most powerful men, at the center of a national corruption case, suddenly dead in his own home. The official story was that Plunkett had murdered Ned and then taken his own life, but many suspected there was more to the story. Meanwhile, the courts eventually canceled the oil leases. Both Teapot Dome and Elk Hills were returned to the US government. Sinclair went to prison for jury tampering. Fall was convicted of taking the bribe, but Doheny walked free. Right behind me are some of the oil fields here in LA. A lot of people don't know, before Hollywood, the oil boom is kind of what created LA. And that oil boom was started by Edward Doheny. And if you live in LA, you've probably heard the name Doheny a lot. He started the oil boom here. The first well he found was near Echo Park. If you guys are enjoying this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let's try to get to 10K subscribers this year. And check out the Patreon. I've got a whole exclusive series on there. It's uncensored. Some of the videos are kind of longer and they go deeper into like conspiracies and things that might get me demonetized, like true crime. So if you want to support the channel and get more content, check that out. I have an entire video that's just on the history of oil in LA, and I'm gonna put that link right here. But what had really happened to Ned and Hugh Plunkett at the Greystone Mansion? Was the story as simple as what was being said at the time? On the night of February 16th, 1929, just months after Ned Doheny and his family had moved into the newly finished Greystone Mansion, gunfire erupted. The official accounts stated that Plunkett had entered the mansion late that evening, unwell and agitated. The two reportedly argued in a side wing of the home. Shortly before 11 p.m., gunshots rang out. Plunkett, the story claimed, had fatally shot Ned during the confrontation before turning the gun on himself. But from the beginning, there were inconsistencies. For one, Lucy Doheny, Ned's wife, was in the house with their children. Rather than calling the police after hearing the shots, she reportedly contacted the family physician, Dr. Ernest Fishbaugh, who arrived alone at the scene. Only after a delay of several hours were authorities notified, by which time the bodies had already been moved and the room cleaned. When investigators arrived at 2 a.m., they found Plunkett's body in the hallway, with a cigarette still burning between his fingers. Ned's body was found nearby, at the foot of a bed. The gun, a .45 caliber Bisley Colt revolver, was discovered underneath Plunkett, but notably wiped clean of fingerprints. It was also still warm to the touch, far longer than it should have been, suggesting it had possibly been heated deliberately, perhaps in an attempt to support the official timeline. Plunkett was a man known to be tightly wound and suffering from what doctors described as a nervous condition. He was under pressure at the time, both from within the household and possibly from the pending second Teapot Dome trial, in which both he and Ned were expected to testify. The theory presented to the public was that Plunkett had become unstable, under the stress, and committed a sudden act of violence. But private investigators and some within the DA's office weren't convinced. Rumors soon circulated that the motive wasn't financial, but personal. Some whispered that Ned and Hugh were more than just close friends, that a deeper bond existed between them. Others believed Plunkett may have felt used and discarded by the Doheny family, as the legal pressure intensified. A more dramatic theory suggested that someone else entirely may have been present that night, and that the deaths were staged to protect the Doheny name from further scandal. Adding to the mystery, both men were buried in Forest Lawn Cemetery, not in the Catholic Calvary Cemetery, where the rest of the Doheny family was buried. For a devout Catholic family, this was unusual. Some took it as a sign that Ned may have taken his own life, which would have prevented a traditional Catholic burial. Edward Doheny arrived in Los Angeles as a penniless drifter. He left it as one of the richest men in American history, a titan of oil, a political kingmaker, and the man who single-handedly launched the Southern California oil boom. But as with so many legacies built on power and ambition, his story came at a cost.